It was late October, and the air in the small, isolated town of Black Pine, Oregon, carried a chill that seemed to seep into your bones. The town was nestled deep in the Cascades, surrounded by dense forests and jagged mountains that blocked most cell signals and internet connections. Black Pine was the kind of place where people went to disappear whether they wanted to or not. I'd come here for a solo hiking trip, a chance to escape the noise of city life. My phone had been useless since I arrived, but I didn't mind. The silence was part of the appeal. The cabin I rented was a small, weathered structure at the edge of town, with a sagging porch and windows that rattled in the wind. The owner, an old man named Carl, had handed me the keys with a strange warning: don't go too far into the woods after dark. And if you hear static, don't follow it. I laughed it off. Static? In the middle of nowhere? It sounded like the kind of nonsense locals told tourists to spook them. But Carl's eyes were serious, and his hands trembled as he spoke. I nodded politely and forgot about it until the second night. I woke to a faint crackling sound, like an old radio struggling to tune into a station. It was 2:47 a.m., and the cabin was pitch black. I sat up in bed, my breath visible in the cold air, and listened. The static was faint but persistent, coming from somewhere outside. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking under my weight. The forest was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. But there it was again: crackle, hiss, crackle like a broken broadcast. It seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods. I remembered Carl's warning, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled on my boots and jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped into the darkness. The beam of light cut through the fog, illuminating gnarled tree trunks and patches of moss. The static grew louder as I walked, but it wasn't consistent. It would fade, then surge, like it was moving. I tried to convince myself it was just an old radio tower or some forgotten equipment, but something about it felt wrong. It wasn't just noise. There was a rhythm to it, almost like breathing. After 20 minutes of walking, I found myself in a small clearing. The static was deafening now, filling the air like a swarm of invisible insects. In the center of the clearing stood a rusted metal box, about the size of a microwave, with a tangle of wires spilling out of it. It looked ancient, like something from the 1950s, but the static was clearly coming from it. I approached cautiously, my flashlight flickering as I got closer. The box had a small, cracked screen, like an old TV. As I leaned in, the static on the screen shifted, forming shapes blurry at first, then sharper. It was a face. A human face, but distorted, its features stretched and twisted like melted wax. Its eyes were black voids, and its mouth opened and closed as if trying to speak. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, but the static followed me, louder now, almost screaming. I turned and ran, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly. The static chased me, echoing through the trees, growing louder and more frantic. I could feel it pressing against my skull, like it was trying to get inside. By the time I reached the cabin, I was shaking so badly I could barely lock the door. The static stopped abruptly, leaving the silence deafening. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went into town to ask Carl about the box. His face paled when I described it. "You saw the hollow signal," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's been here longer than anyone can remember. They say it's a door to somewhere else. And if you listen too long, it takes you." I asked him what he meant, but he wouldn't say more. He just handed me a map of the area, with a red circle drawn around the clearing. "Stay away," he said. "And if you hear it again, cover your ears. Don't let it in." I tried to laugh it off, but the memory of that face on the screen haunted me. I decided to cut my trip short and leave the next day. But that night, the static returned. It started softly, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder, more insistent. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. It was inside my head now, a cacophony of noise that made my teeth ache. I stumbled to the window and saw something in the trees, a figure, tall and thin, its limbs unnaturally long. It stood just beyond the reach of the porch light, swaying slightly, like it was listening. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it at the figure, but the beam seemed to bend around it, as if the light couldn't touch it. The static surged, and I heard something new, a voice, faint and garbled, buried in the noise. It was saying my name. I slammed the curtains shut and backed away, my heart racing. The static grew louder, and the voice became clearer, repeating my name over and over, like a chant. I tried to block it out, but it was everywhere inside me, around me, filling the cabin with its relentless drone. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up on the floor, my hands pressed against my ears, but eventually, the noise stopped. When I opened my eyes, the cabin was different. The walls were covered in scratches, deep and jagged, like something had clawed at them. The furniture was overturned, and my flashlight was shattered on the floor. I checked my phone, but the screen was cracked, and it wouldn't turn on. The map Carl had given me was gone. I packed my bags and left at first light, driving as fast as I could down the winding mountain roads. The static followed me, faint at first, then louder, filling the car with its maddening hum. I turned on the radio to drown it out, but every station was the same static, and that voice, whispering my name. I made it to the nearest town, but the static didn't stop. It's been weeks now, and I can still hear it, even in the city. It's quieter during the day, but at night, it comes back, louder and more insistent. Sometimes I see the figure again, standing in the shadows, watching. I've tried to tell people, but no one believes me. They say I'm stressed, that I need to see a doctor. But I know it's real. The hollow signal isn't just a sound, it's alive, and it's looking for me. I don't know how much longer I can keep running. If you're reading this, and you hear static in the middle of the night, don't follow it. Don't listen. Because once it finds you, it never lets go.